Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here with you all and just sense into this beautiful Sangha here. I love reading where you all are located too in the chat. It's really sweet to kind of get a sense for all these different lights. Just I have that image a lot when I get on these sessions with people. It's like, oh, there's all these little lights that are lighting up all over the world. And I know sometimes that sounds cheesy, and at the same time, it brings a lot of joy to my heart. So thank you all. So today, as Marnie has told you all, we'll explore the phases of insight, and it's a simple chart that I've done a lot of contemplation around through various years of my own practice and teaching. But before we get there, I want to offer you all a guided meditation. Really, that's what brings me here with you all is practice. I love practice. And when I first started practicing, I did not intend to actually show up in the teacher's seat. So it's always a joy to be able to practice and teach. So I really invite you to join me in a guided mindfulness practice. So I'll offer you some just reminders. I know you all have a practice already. And of course, you can follow along or not. If it doesn't land with you, not a big deal. Um, and the way that the practice instructions will unfold is I'll start with a narrow focus of attention, and then we'll gradually expand it to include all of experience. Okay, so we'll systematically open attention to include more and more and more if you're up for it. So we'll go for about 25 or so minutes here. Um, Given our time constraints together. And, for some of you, you might have a daily practice and then for some of you, you might be thinking, "Oh gosh, thank goodness I'm showing up to this session because I'll get it check, done today." Or you might, be like going to the gym where it's not, it's something that can be a struggle. And I just want to invite you all for this time to sense into what you need in this moment and adjust your posture accordingly. So just sense into how you need to be in this moment, how you need to be sitting, how you need to be lying down, if you need to be standing. And then that all can shift and change. And I'm going to gradually offer the instructions to slow and steady, slow and steadily kind of bring us into presence together. And you may have your eyes open and closed. There's no right or wrong way to be in this moment, really, together. And sensing into your body breathing, and perhaps sensing and knowing the air on the skin. And you might notice that attention gets absorbed in thinking. So just know this. And if the thinking mind is busy, know it as busy. Busy mind is like this. And sometimes when we first start to settle in a little bit into our practice, we start to want it to be a certain way. And if that's happening, I invite you to soften, to relax a little bit more around any kind of expectations for this moment. And now will invite you to rest attention. You can do this with hearing or perhaps breathing if it feels comfortable to you, but just rest attention gently with an anchor. Notice what it's like to rest attention gently, like a butterfly landing on a flower, with sensing and knowing the body breathing. And where is attention now? Just gently relax into this knowing, remembering the body breathing, and just sustaining attention with the body breathing in and out. And as you remember the body breathing, just know this is your home base for now. So if there's any confusion or anything that comes up, you can return here, just simply breathing. And perhaps inviting the body, heart, and mind to relax a little bit more. We can't make it happen, but we can invite it, opening the door a little bit more. May the body, mind, heart relax. And sometimes when we invite relaxation, everything except for that comes up first. So if you're sitting there really agitated and this is very difficult, just honor that. No, difficulty is like this. May the body, mind, heart relax. And now I invite you to expand attention to include body sensations, sensing the body breathing, and also knowing and sensing the changing sensations. And just notice what it's like. Is it a wide angled type of attention that you can hold the whole body within it? Or does it feel more natural and comfortable to allow attention to rest on a particular place? And where is attention now? If it was in thinking, know that thinking is like this. And I invite you to expand attention to include feelings, emotions, recognizing if there's a feeling, an emotion that you can just gently name: confusion, sadness, joy, contentment. And if you can't actually recognize it, don't freak out. Just simply perhaps know if your experience is pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Neutral is like blinking. Sometimes that can be a doorway into knowing what's happening. And sometimes it can help to recognize feelings by noticing movements of mind, pushing away, clinging, spacing out. And just gently remembering whole body breathing, body sensations moving and changing, feelings, emotions coming and going. Whether you like it or not in this moment, it's just like this. And where is attention now? Just gently relax into this knowing. If it wasn't thinking, know that. And perhaps take a slight energetic shift back and down, sensing the body breathing. And you may recognize reverberations or imprints of whatever you might have been thinking, feelings, emotions. And perhaps check in with your body and what's happening for you now and allow yourself to move and to shift positions if you need to do that. Sometimes striving seeps into our practice and we start to try to hold ourselves in a particular way or do it right. See if you can sense into that movement and stillness. The body is breathing, sensations coming and going, feelings arising and passing. And now including thoughts coming and going. And if you're thinking they don't come and go, I get stuck in them, notice that. See if you can give yourself permission to know in this moment the capacity for all of experience to just arise and to pass, moment by moment by moment. The beauty of mindfulness practice is that you can know and sense what's happening as it's happening. And whatever it is okay. It might not feel okay. So if you're struggling and this is difficult, no contraction is like this. And then see if you can soften around any sense that it needs to be or should be, or you can change this. However, give yourself permission to influence what's happening. Change your position, your posture. Include whatever is happening the best you can. Moving is like this. Breathing is like this. Resistance is like this. Checking the timer is like this. Being present together is like this. And where is attention now? Gently relax into it, and this knowing and remembering thoughts too can arise and pass. Simply knowing the body breathing. If it helps you deepen into presence, you can experiment with naming or tracking what you're noticing as you're noticing it. Perhaps you notice patterns, breathing long, breathing short. What's happening? And as you sense into the body breathing in this moment, if you haven't already inclined to loving kindness or some sort of heart space, I invite you to do that now. May loving awareness arise. And just notice what comes up as we invite heart space. Sometimes everything that's not it, we think, comes up first. May loving awareness arise. And I also want to acknowledge as we sense into the possibility, loving awareness being here, holding us all, no matter what, just that possibility that we're all bringing with us a lot into this moment, various places, cultures, causes and conditions, sorrows, joys. And so perhaps in this moment, I invite you to sense into that we're here in this space together right now. May loving awareness arise, holding it together with something much, much bigger. And perhaps check in and see if there's another quality of heart that you can invite here: gratitude, compassion. It might not arise right away, just opening doors. And in the last minute of this formal practice, sensing your body breathing, know what wisdom is here. And if your thinking mind says, there's no wisdom here, give yourself permission. You can know this. I can know this. What wisdom is here? And now closing your practice in the way that feels comfortable to you, I will say thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to slowly and gently shift here. And perhaps just sensing into what it's like to kind of shift from internally focus back into the group here in this way. And I'm going to offer a talk here in a moment, but I'll give us a moment to just kind of shift. So, as you know, I want to offer a simple chart here: phases of insight. I've been practicing within the insight meditation tradition along with my husband and partner since I was 21. I'm 43 now, so I'll let you not have to sit there guessing how old I am. Um, And part of what I was contemplating with offering you all this chart is that, starting my practice when I was 21, 43 now. And when I first started, I was a retreat junkie. Some of you all might be similarly attuned. various parts of your life, but in my 20s, I went on so many meditation retreats. I was very fortunate of being able to practice with Jack Kornfield and Trudy Goodman and Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein, some of the original people that brought the Buddhist practice of insight meditation and Vipassana over to the Western part of the world. And on the retreats, part of what I was tuning into, or we were instructed to tune into, are different patterns. And part of the way that we had done that is the noting practice. You all familiar with the noting practice or the naming, where you just kind of name what's happening as it's happening? And that came from Mahasi Sayadaw, and who taught Sharon and Joseph and some of the teachers that I studied with. And it's just a technique, and it became a very popular technique. And so part of what I was contemplating, that was my 20s. I've also been through my 30s with a child and a diagnosis of a chronic illness, and part of why I'm bringing this topic into this space is that regardless of the causes and conditions of my life, these patterns have shown up again and again and again and have really supported me in navigating what's happening. All right. And when I first started practicing, I didn't start practicing to learn patterns necessarily, but that's just part of the fruits of the practice. And so I'll share those patterns with you. And even this morning, I was like, is this even practical? You know how doubt, the mind comes in and steals our experiences, like Trudy Goodman says. It's like a thief. It comes in and you're clear, and then here comes that thinking mind, right? Even this morning, I was like, is this even practical? I'm like, oh gosh, okay, thank you, thank you, thank you, thinking mind. But then what's funny about consciousness is like 5 minutes later, I was Googling 9-year-olds and patterns of behavior for 9-year-olds because I have a 9-year-old. And I was like, okay, so let me just check in. He's getting ready to turn 9. Like what do I need to expect here? And I was looking at the patterns, right? And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Our practice can present in these rhythms and these cycles and these patterns. And sometimes it is helpful to say, okay, yeah, other people have experienced this. Oh, wait, I feel stuck. Oh, there is something on the other side. What is it? Somebody else might have some ideas about that. So
Very,
that's
very good.
that's a little bit of what um, the intention behind this is, because once I've learned to recognize these patterns, it's really supported me in a moment of mindfulness, as Sharon Salzberg says, is a moment of freedom. So if I can recognize a quality of the pattern, it wakes me up so much quicker. And there's a lot more fluidity in my life. I can roll with it a lot easier. All right. Even when it's difficult. So I'm going to tell you um, the phases, and then I'll go back through and I'll give you a little bit more information about them. And then, of course, you can ask questions at the end. So, the phases, there's seeking, and you might recognize some of this in your own experience, hopefully. So, there's seeking, effort, breakthrough, disillusionment, inclusion or equanimity, and then completion. And again, this is like the phases of the moon. So I invite you to see this as phases. All right. And what do we know about phases? They cycle. All right. And part of what we know about phases is like you kind of know there's going to be a new moon and you know there's going to be a full moon, and then it kind of starts over. All right. So at various points in our practice and in our life, we may sense into like, oh, I've kind of been here before. Have you ever noticed that you've had an insight and then you had the same insight and you're like, I already knew that. Why do I keep realizing that again? All right. So this is kind of what happens with our practices. Like you go through these cycles and we wake up and we wake up and we wake up. Um, and then I feel like we stay awake longer. That's my sense. So seeking, um, when we're seeking, and in this context, I just want to gently remind us that it's a contemplative view that I'm holding. So you might see these patterns in various places, and I'm going to zoom us into holding a contemplative view. All right. And what I mean that is just means when you are um, in a spiritual practice, when you're practicing mindfulness and holding a view, hey, okay, like what am I seeking within this view? And that's what I would like to invite you to explore. If you're not clear about what you're seeking, what are you seeking? All right. There's this phrase in the Bible, seek and ye shall find. It's in Matthew. I think it's 7:7. And it says, "Seek and ye shall find." And I grew up in a very southern, a very southern United States, southern town in North Carolina, and it was very Christian focused. I went to a lot of different kinds of churches, and heard a lot. And at some point, I changed in the way that I was seeking because saw that, okay, wait, I don't want to just take in what I'm hearing as the truth. I actually want to find this out for myself. All right. So that seek and ye shall find became really important. It was like, okay, so what am I seeking? What am I seeking to find? I had one of my first spiritual teachers look at me very clearly and say, it's a very powerful invocation, actually, seek and ye shall find. However, do you really know what you're seeking? Because if you're seeking to prove some sort of thing like, oh, I'm not lovable, then you might start to call to you situations where you're proving that. So I really want to just offer to you that if you don't know what you're seeking on the spiritual path, it's a very tender contemplation, actually. It can be. Um, and I invite you into that more explicitly. Tokupal Turner from Belonging Ourselves Home, she said, before we even ask ourselves how to heal our estrangement, we must first sink down into the wound itself and apprentice ourselves to it. We must enter into the question of what has been missing from us, of what we are deprived. Only when we lower ourselves down into that holy longing can we get a glimpse of the majesty that we are supposed to become. All right. So I just want to just offer to you that this sense of holy longing that something's missing from us, that something is incomplete, that for me it actually presented as like, I'm not so sure sitting in all these different churches, from Baptist church, from Episcopal church to Catholic church, I'm not so sure I'm getting told the truth. Like I started questioning, like, what is the truth here? I just really started seeking to know for myself, like, what is truth? What is really happening here? That's the way it started presenting itself for me, which led me to insight meditation practice or mindfulness practice. All right. So, mindfulness is sensing and knowing what's happening in any given moment. And when we turn towards insight, we start to make effort to see things more clearly, how things are changing constantly, how we're in process, and, and how we create suffering for ourselves and each other that we just don't, it's not necessary. All right. So to have those insights, though, we have to go to this next level of effort. All right. So in the seeking, we kind of call to ourselves the resources energetically. We do our Google searches. I found insight meditation practice. I'm going to go for it. All right. And so we have to start making effort. All right, there has to be some sort of effort. Now, effort is one of those things in the Buddhist wisdom tradition that it's good in the middle, it's good at the beginning, and it's good at the end. Yeah, this is one of the common sayings, meaning that our relationship to wise effort, that's going to be a practice in itself. All right. And depending on what's happening in your life, and of course, there's cycles within cycles. So in some places, you might need to apply more effort or less effort. And Trudy Goodman, who's one of my heart teachers, she says we find our balance by falling out of balance. All right, we find our balance by falling out of balance. And it's kind of like that tree pose in yoga where it's like we pick you can pick your leg up and rest it on your knee and you can find that balance. But then how long can you hold it really? Yeah. You start to wobble and then you kind of come back into, okay, what's needed in this moment. So wise effort. And we learn a lot about ourselves in the wise effort phase, how we go about doing things. Do we strive? Some people are such strivers in meditation practice. I was, but not as much as like sometimes like my husband, for example. I mean, he was like going for it. Like he would meditate for hours a day at some point. Like he was striving, striving, striving. Um, some people it's like, okay, like for me, I was like, I'll do it later. Like it's not a big deal. But then that had an impact on my practice too. And what's interesting about striving is that what works in one day might not work in another day. right? So we always have these techniques or strategies that happen in the striving part of our practice. Um, I had like we printed out like I had a group of people that we were accountable, like accountability buddies for meditation, and we would check off on the refrigerator, right? Every day that we actually practiced, sat on our cushion, we would check, 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 check. That really helped gain momentum and effort. Um, to a point, and then, it didn't work anymore, and we had to change our relationship to it. So just to say what works one time doesn't work all the time. However, part of the process is really coming into a relationship with, okay, how do I go about this? Do I push? Do I pull? Do I try to control this? And then as you start to see that more clearly, um, the body starts to relax, because with effort, a lot of times when we first start, have you noticed that you have a lot of pain sometimes with the effort? When you're sitting, the body can start to hurt, actually. It's called meditator's pain. But if you get up and it disappears, then that's kind of a sign, okay, well, maybe this is a byproduct of meditation. So with effort, there might be actually some physical pain. And then once you start to work with that, along with the movements of these minds, like pushing it away, it's just uncomfortable. As things start to settle, you see more clearly, and then what happens? You break through, all right? You break through. And in breakthrough, it's an interesting phase, because this is where, I like to describe it as I've worked with a lot of mindfulness teachers at this point. I help train mindfulness teachers. And I feel like in the breakthrough phase, like almost every meditation teacher that I've ever worked with has been through the breakthrough phase, because it's the phase where everybody wants to teach everybody, or they want to get their friends to practice, or it's you see it. You see something that's happening. It's like this stuff actually works. If you do it, it works. Yeah, you start to see, oh, things are really changing very quickly. If I can allow my feelings to come and go, they don't have to be so sticky, and I don't have to have these feelings of like drowning as much, or whatever it is. All right. You start to see very clearly. Um, and you start to see how you create your own suffering, which part of that is previously with the effort phase, the pushing and pulling and controlling. It's like with the breakthrough, it's like, oh, if I see that and I can choose, oh, I don't have to do that right now. Oh, wait, there's more space and more clarity and more choice, more freedom. Um, People tend to, kind of be a little high in some ways in the breakthrough. It's like it's very expansive. There's a lot of joy. Um, and the sense of observer comes with breakthrough. That sense in mindfulness practice where you really can have that sense of observing, where things are just coming and going. And that's sense of observer for a lot of people is it's it's a lot more comfortable than being in the tunnel vision. You know what the tunnel vision feels like when you can't even, it's like, oh, no one else exists except for me and my shit, right? So it's a lot more comfortable than that, to be able to kind of expand and um, include more, um, that sense of observer, that witness. Peak experiences are part of it. Um, and arising and passing, like really tuning into the rising and passing is a really big part of it. And then what happens though? Disillusionment. Because what we saw in breakthrough, have you had this experience where it's like in that moment it's awesome, but then 2 seconds later you kind of like the 2020, like inside, and you're like, oh my gosh, and then you freak out even though it was great like 2 seconds before then? It's like something like a whiplash effect. Um, because the implications of what you've seen, oh, wait a second, I can't continue to live my life that way. I've just seen through this, right? So there means there has to, like, there's a disalignment now that's happening. Um, and that's very painful, actually, with disillusionment. It's like what you thought was going to happen might not actually be the way things are. So now you're kind of in a fight with reality. Um, It's really, and I bring this up and I'll emphasize disillusionment a little bit more than the other ones, because I feel like my sense is that we're all going through some sort of disillusionment in our life. And if you're not, if it's not what's in the forefront, give it a moment or two. and then turn on the news. Or it's a lot. Like we are beyond, a lot of us, our threshold for any kind of consistent presence. Okay. So in some ways, I feel like our whole world is coming into some sort of realignment. And I don't know how long that's going to take. And I don't know how much more brutal it's going to be, just to be very honest with you. And part of the disillusionment process, though, brings us really up, like face to face, like to the point of like, okay, what is happening? Like what I have now seen very clearly, this practice does quote unquote work. It doesn't work in the way I thought it was going to work. All right. It doesn't always feel like it's working, but something is happening. Something is revealing itself. And the connection to what I might have been seeking it's starting to come out behind the clouds more and more and more. All right. But in disillusionment, it's cloudy. I'm not going to lie to you. All right. It's very cloudy. And sometimes there can be a lot of doubt. Right. This is one of the key emotions and mind states. I don't even, just even like going into disillusionment, talking about it, I'm like, oh, I feel myself shrinking, pulling away. A lot of anger comes up in disillusionment, a lot of anger. Confusion. This is one of my like main ones. It's like I just get confused. I'm like, I don't know what's happening. Um, and fear. So this is when it's like, oh, you've had your sunny breakthroughs, and then here comes disillusionment, and it's like really it's gonna start to challenge the integration of what you've seen. That's my experience of it. It's like, okay, are we going to integrate this? Like, okay, this is going to take some time. This is going to take some work. Um, this is going to take some deep soul searching in a lot of ways. A lot of people roll up the mat in disillusionment, actually. It's the point in practice where I feel like a lot of people just quit. Or they change practices. It's like, oh, okay, well, mindfulness, oh, that's actually really uncomfortable. Let me try transcendental meditation, or let me try. So it's like people start to really do the buffet thing. And I've done it too. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just like it becomes so uncomfortable that we are searching for that desire for deliverance, which is in the Buddhist tradition. It's like, it can get to the point where we're just like struggling so much with the way that things are that we just want, all right, let me out of here. All right. Um, there's a lot of shedding, a lot of grief in this phase. And what's the key? Oh, people want to go back. That's one of the things I hear a lot from people. It's like my practice was working. Can I just go back? Like I just want to go back, get back to where I was. All right. So part of the invitation with going through these phases like this is to kind of sense into your own experience. Do you have patterns that you can like just sense into now that come up along with these phases? With disillusionment, I get the thought that I'm going to move. Like I have this thing about moving. And so when I'm in disillusionment, I've got to move to Costa Rica or to France or somewhere. All right. And it's taken me a long time to like see that as part of my patterning around shedding and grieving and dissolving. Because what's happening is that part of what's happening is we've got to include more and more and more. And disillusionment's teaching us that like everything's actually, with mindfulness practice and insight, it's actually included. We can't exclude anything. I mean, we can try, but that's part of what our cognitive rational minds are going to go just bonkers, all right, during this phase, bonkers. So part of what we have to do, my sense is that we have to love it. And it's so hard. All right. Because even that word, you're like, oh, feel into your, like what's happening for you now. She did it. She said that love word, right? Love is the answer. It's okay. Like whatever comes up around that. I didn't say it had to look a certain way. I didn't say love look like this. That's where I think things get a little discombobulated. Our rational minds want it to look a certain way, but that's not going to hold loving some horrid things that are happening right now, tragic things that are happening right now. All right. So our rational mind isn't what's going to include all of it. All right. However, when we can sense into that, when our rational mind can have just enough, that's part of what the phases is for. Just enough rational mind, cognitive mind, just enough. Here are your trends, here are your patterns. All right, because here we go. We got to love it so that what we can open and that shedding can happen, that grief can happen, the child's pose or whatever needs to like happen, the honestly, just the gut wrenching pain. And then it'll open. Okay. This is part of why I love teaching on the cycles because I know it will open. All right. It'll open. And what opens, we open into inclusion or an equanimity. All right. And in some ways, some of you might have heard equanimity before. And I come to this part in the phases and I'm like, oh, there's so many um, there's so many just aspects of equanimity that we can start to long for, and it sets us up. So it's like, oh, equanimity is the goal, right? To be able to be okay with whatever is arising and passing, and be stable and balanced. Um, and Thanissaro Bhikkhu says that equanimity is not the goal; it's the start of a solution. All right. So I want to present it to you like that. It's the start of a solution because once we start to include more and more and more, our sense of identity changes so that we're more spacious. And with inclusion and equanimity, there's not that pushing and pulling and trying to control and manipulate. And if you all have relationships with other people, which I'm guessing you have a relationship with at least one other person, you know that if you make an action out of wanting to control, manipulate, change that person, or get out of your discomfort, if that's where you're coming from, more than likely, what's the impact? Like, what's the result of that going to be? Not so great, usually. All right. So you can see that in your own personal experience. However, when we're able to expand to include more and more, and the moment becomes more workable. Yeah. And so if you're going to make an action out of any state, inclusion and equanimity is a great one to kind of sense into what's needed and take an action from in that moment. All right. Because with equanimity and inclusion, when we reach this, it's like the struggle. It's like, it's not, in some ways, it's like, what has been the struggle? Like, what's been the problem? All right. We've let go, we've shed it enough at this point where inclusion, um, things can just arise and pass. And our sense of self, there's just not so much of a struggle, which gives us a beautiful time or phase to start to question. All right. So in this phase, it's like really a beautiful time to inquire into, okay, well, like, what is happening? Like, what is it that you want to know? All right. You can start to fine tune that compass of the heart, bring back that sense of what got you on the path, what brought you to this moment of really sensing into, okay, wait, what can be a moment of completion? All right, how does this resolve? Right. What I started with seeking, how does that complete itself? All right. And sometimes it does help for us to get in touch with that, what brought us to the path to begin with, that longing. Um, Maria Rilke, translated by Joanna Macy, he he says, go to the limits of your longing. And to me, this is where we really start to just like go to the limits of it. Listen. God speaks to each of us as he makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand. And in a lot of ways, that's what I feel like happens is as that moment of completion comes. It's like we extend our hand and then it's taken and it's like there was no separation to begin with. All right. That it's here. We might be seeking for it. And then we start to realize again and again and again, like what we're seeking is here. It's been here all along. It's like the phases of the moon. It's like it's contained with the sky. The sky is here all the time within the phases. All right. And sooner or later, that recognition of like, oh, yeah, you can be in the new moon, you can be in the full moon, but there's always the sky here. All right. There can be awareness and the awareness of whatever is happening. All right. And then the recognition and the completion of like, oh, wait, there is no separation. All right. There's no separation. Not really. It's complete here now. David Loy, he's a Buddhist teacher. He says, he said that sense of separation from the world is what motivates me to try to secure myself within it. But according to the Buddhist wisdom tradition, the only satisfactory resolution is to realize I am not other than it. All right. So in seeking, we're like outside looking everywhere. Completion, it's like, oh yeah, it's like it's here. Like there that movement comes together. All right. And part of what we learn is what keeps us from remembering that. All right. Remember, Trudy Goodman says the mind is like a thief. It comes in and tries to steal your experiences. Oh, she's talking about that person, not me. That's just a thought. All right. Or with completion, it's like, so there's the eclipse that's happening tomorrow. Yeah. Which I was kind of excited that I was going to give this talk with the eclipse happening tomorrow because it's like, oh, wait, there's the phases. And then there's like these eclipses that happen. And then what's even more interesting is that if this is just a mirror, it's like awareness. You look in the mirror and it's okay. It's just a reflection. But then it's like, oh, wait, 2 seconds later, oh, my hair doesn't look good, the pimples, like, so eclipse is happening. And of course, my kid is mad because we're not in the total eclipse. Somebody else has a better eclipse than we have. All right. Well, some people in Europe, you might be thinking, oh, well, I don't even get to see the eclipse, you know? So in some ways, this is what completion does to our cognitive minds. It kind of freaks it out. But I just want to say, you've got this. All right. Yeah, you've got this. So just bow to those thoughts, bow to those moments where it feels like it's not already here. And then go from there. So this moment, steady, and then explore. All right. What is this really? All right. What is this really? T.S. Eliot, he says, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all is our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. All right, you all, we're going to slowly shift here. And I have not been keeping up with the chat, so I have no idea what's in there. But I will open it up now for questions if there's any kind of questions. What's here?
Emily, in the chat, there was just one question of clarification. And the person was, let me see. Leslie asks, is the word disillusionment or disillusionment?
Disillusionment.
Like illusion.
Illusionment. The shattering of illusions. What else is here? I see a lot of faceless screen squares. Anybody have any questions, comments? Did you relate to this at all? Oh, Jane, raise your hand. Jane, go ahead.
Hello, Emily and everyone. It's a pleasure to
Mhm.
be here and thank you for all your sharing. I have a question and a comment. My question is, I find completion an interesting word for, I don't know. My sense of completion is that it then does, it doesn't really relate to me when I think about that we're always a work in progress.
Mhm.
So completion sounds like it's an end. And to
Mhm.
me, it's not an end, it's an
Mhm.
evolution, it's a journey.
Mhm.
And we keep growing and we keep learning and we keep processing. So that's my that's my kind of question about the word completion. The
Mhm.
other thing is I was really struck at the beginning when you were giving the phases, and I know that you are familiar with Tara Brock,
Mhm.
and Tara Brock has been generous about sharing her technique, the rain technique. And I found your phases quite similar to rain. So I'm
Mm.
curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay, couple of things there, huh? Uh, I hear you on the completion. For a while, there's been this image in the Buddhist wisdom tradition, at least, it's like you're walking up a mountain and then you're planting a flag at the top, and then that's not really how it works. Um, and in some ways, there's a both and that I incline to holding here. It's like, okay, there can be moments where things resolve. Just like you can lose a job, and in that moment, there's a birth and the death that happens at the same time. There's a completion along with it. And so that's part of the reason why I feel like the moon, the phases are such an important thing. So it's like, oh yeah, you can get to the completion, you can get to the full moon, and then what happens? You start over. So I hear that, and I do feel like in some ways, being a human being, we do want that sense of, okay, yeah, there is something that resolves, and at the same time, yeah, there is this something that keeps on going. And as far as the rain, yes, very popular technique. Michelle McDonald actually came up with it, and then Tara Brock really popularized it. And I've been practicing some sort of technique around rain for so long that I'm not gonna say it didn't influence the way that these phases came about. Um, yeah. Anything else in regards to that, or
Thank you. That was lovely.
yeah.
I appreciate
Hmm.
it. Stay
Yeah.
well.
Mhm. What else?
I see that Emma. Emma, would you like
Emma.
to? Mhm.
Hi, I'm just gonna leave my camera off. I'm
That's fine.
autistic and I'm struggling a bit with the camera today. But I mean, talk about like the crazy wisdom. I think Wes Niska talks about crazy wisdom.
Mm,
It just really is all landing for me today, like everything you said, and I really want to thank you as well for giving us all like the opportunity to deepen our faith in all of this as well, because
mm,
that's sort of where I am with my journey, is that I've learned about the practices and I've practiced them, and then my level of awareness is obviously it's come through into knowledge and into like being, but now it's times like you say with like the disillusionment and stuff where you sometimes also have to have a bit of faith that that completion is, or if you don't want to say it's completion because it's the finality related to it, you know, that there is more coming. There's more than this. And like you say, it's all cyclical. And um, I guess a question that was sort of coming up for me was because I've started looking into the moon phases as well. Do you have any advice for anyone with regards to how if they could, what's the word I'm looking for? So with the moon phases, like now it's before a new moon, like the guidance is around not making new plans and things and just going inwards and resting. I don't know if there's anything relating to these stages of insight that might be helpful, suggestions or guidance relating to better self-care or deepening your relationship with compassion, or does that make sense?
Well, there's a lot here that you're asking, I feel like, my senses. And a part of what I'm hearing you ask is like, if we were to look at the phases, and each phase might have a different way of relating to what's happening in your life. And with each phase, your practice might actually change. Is that somewhat what you're saying?
Yeah.
S-
And
Okay. And
yeah,
then like
I think
where,
that's it.
yeah, and it's where it's like, okay, for what I heard and what came up is just like, okay, so for example, like in the disillusionment phase, in the disillusionment phase, it's like there's not what used to be working in your practice is probably not working anymore. Whereas with effort, you might actually have to apply that effort. You might have to say, okay, yeah, I'm actually going to make, in some ways you kind of are disciplined and you're making yourself sit on the cushion. Whereas in other phases like disillusionment, that strategy is not going to work anymore, just as an example. So I've kind of heard you asking, it's like, okay, so yeah, that's part of your discernment. That's part of like that beginning, middle, and end being good with wise effort. It's like no one's really going to be able to tell you like what you need to do per se. But what I can say is that like in the disillusionment phase, what you were doing in the effort phase, those two things probably are going to look a lot different. A lot of times in the disillusionment stage, we're still trying to make our practice conform to the way it was looking before. Like if I sat for 10 minutes and I had an insight, then if I keep sitting for 10 minutes and I make myself do it, then I'll have another insight. But with disillusionment, it's like, no, it's counterintuitive. It's like you're going to have to let go of what you thought was working at that time is fine, but now we're in a different moment. You might need to go take a lot of walks, a lot of hikes, a lot of runs, or something like that during that time. Whereas effort, you might not have even allowed yourself to even think about that, right? So, is this a little bit in alignment with what you were asking?
It's exactly, yeah. Like I've realized that I used to be like, I have to do meditation like every morning and every night for a certain time. And then, like you say, when you're going through these phases, it's growing that awareness of like, it needs to be responsive to the
Yes,
situation that I'm in.
yes.
And sometimes doing meditation isn't going to be meaningful in that way, if you know what I mean, because it's not the time to do it in that moment.
Hmm.
And having the recognition and awareness of that is huge when, like you say, when you have like willful effort and you're just like, this is what I'm going to do. It doesn't work when you're going through like disillusionment. So, well, not for me anyway. So yeah,
Hmm.
thank you.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, thank you. Mm.
Um, let's see. There's something in the chat by Joanne. How does discernment change with each phase, and how does discernment differentiate from decision making?
Rachel, that's a lot. I don't know exactly. I haven't really zoomed into exactly, my research level of that. Um, and I want to be honest about that because I think, part of what happens with these phases is our cognitive mind does want to know exactly what to look for and exactly what to do. And it's a little bit more organic than that. Um, and for me, discernment, this is like an ongoing process and practice in itself. Yeah. To be able to discern in this moment, okay, yeah, that lands, that feels like an appropriate response or explanation, whatever it is. And then to distinguish even that from what judgment. Oh, I don't like the way she said that. Oh, she must really not know what she's talking about because she couldn't answer that question just now. All right. So is that discernment or judgment? So discerning between judgment and discernment is one thing, I'll just say. And for those of you that practice mindfulness a lot and know that, the non-judgmental definition of mindfulness, like know that judgment can arise and pass within that non-judgmental awareness. So judgment is actually okay. It can arise and pass. So to me, when I feel into decision making, because that was another part of that question, and I'm still really questioning decision making. Like, when is it that I actually make the decision? Yeah. Because we can go through all kinds of processes around making the decision. But when you actually make the decision, to me, that feels like a moment of completion. It doesn't happen till it happens, even if you think you know what's going to happen, right? So to me, part of what is helpful with the phases is if I'm in disillusionment and I'm trying to make a decision, that's probably not the best time to make the decision. Okay. So I had a quote that I didn't read from because in disillusionment, that's where your mind is your psychological stuff is rising up. Like your mind is so agitated because nothing makes sense. Your fear, doubt, confusion. Like that's when I'd be like, okay, let's not make a decision. Let's work with our experience in a way so that eventually it'll open up into a more inclusive place and then we can make our decision. Young Pueblo, he does a lot of stuff on Instagram. That's his screen name. In Resilience, he wrote, they asked her, how do you get through tough moments? She answered, do not trust the way you see yourself when your mind is turbulent. And remember that even pain is temporary. Honor your boundaries, treat yourself gently, let go of perfection, and feel your emotions without letting them control you. You have enough experience to face the storm and evolve from it. All right. So that's what comes up when thinking about decision making. Perhaps don't do it when you're super agitated. That's all I've got for that one, unless there's something else in response to that.
We'll see. Lori has a question. I'm wondering about what you mentioned in disillusionment phase and that you felt like you needed to move. I feel the same way. Can you speak more about this?
Mhm. Yeah, we all have our patterns around, getting out of discomfort, and they can be very subtle, um, and they can be not so subtle. And moving is a not so subtle one of mine. So, um, my 20s and 30s, I moved from Boulder, Colorado, um, back and forth from North Carolina to Boulder, Colorado, and LA. And I lost I lost track how many times I did that. And it was at least 10. People would joke because I started Buddhist Geek, or I didn't start Buddhist Geeks, but I started working and helping out with Buddhist Geeks pretty quickly after my husband founded it with a couple of people. And people wouldn't be able to know where we are. They couldn't track us. They'd be like, are you in Boulder still? Are you in LA still? And it took me a long time to sense into that. Like it was a deep, like part of me that was like, if I got to a certain point in my practice and in my life, that was like my eject cord. I was like, I'm just moving, starting over. Um, so it's a more layered thing that I go through now when I have these thoughts of, okay, I need to move. I really do sense into like, okay, well, I mean, a little bit of the grass is greener kind of thing. It's like, okay, well, is it really better in Costa Rica? Yes, my mind will definitely tell me it's better in Costa Rica. Most definitely better in Costa Rica. Um, but then my experience with the thinking process is like, what do we learn through our practice? We don't really need to believe all of our thoughts. They could take me to Costa Rica, and that's not a great thing. Okay. So it's a soul searching kind of process that we go through in our practice to really get into like, okay, what is really needed in this moment, and to really be honest with ourselves. And um, so if your mind keeps going to Costa Rica and it doesn't keep coming to you and just like a calling, then I would say, okay, let me pause, especially if you're like in the fear, doubt, confusion, disillusionment kind of place. What else is here? Hmm. Any other questions? Anything come up now?
I'm not sure as the host. I've never asked a question, but I'm hearing that these phases, though they kind of nourish and feed each other and build, they're not linear. They
Mm-mm.
seem to be like
Mm.
you can weave in and out and go from disillusion and back to effort with right effort and then try again. And then, yeah, I'm wondering if you can
Yes.
just say more about that kind of flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's pretty, in some ways, sometimes it can be pretty infuriating, honestly, to like start to see the cycles within cycles within cycles. I went to one of my teachers on meditation retreats, and I was like, oh my God, all I'm seeing are these cycles. Is there ever an end? In a lot of ways, that's what the Buddhist tradition is pointing us to, is like that samsaric kind of cycle and cycle and cycle and cycle. And it's like, oh, well, the more I can see them, then the more I'm not it. So I can be more fluid within it. But yeah, it's in a lot of ways, the image of the spiral comes up a lot in these kind of conversations. And it's like we're kind of, sometimes we take 5 steps forward and then we feel like we take 10 steps back, right? And that's just the process of growing and developing, really. Yes, so they're not linear. Just let that land to your cognitive mind. Those of you that have been conditioned, those of us that have been conditioned to think that the spiritual path will bring us to some sort of moment of where everything will be perfect. Is that it? Yeah. Hmm. What else is here? I know we have some more space, but you all starting to feel complete? Yeah, once you start to tune into these things, I mean, you can even, it's funny because like I'll be, what's an example of this? Like, even in going to the grocery store the other day, I went through seeking, I need to get my food and I'm seeking food. And it's like, it's really weird. And then I had a moment of disillusionment when I realized the line was going to take me like 15 minutes to get through, on the checkout line. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God. And then I ended up in inclusion, and it's like, okay, well, everything's fine. Like in this moment, I can just be here in the line, whatever. And then eventually I got out of the grocery store. I did complete. Um, so you can take this into whatever you would like to take it into. And hopefully, in some ways, it will provide those moments of like recognition of, oh, okay, yeah, there are some patterns here that are pretty universal. And yet, no, you've got to walk your path, and at some points along the way, um, we'll intersect like we are now, which to me is really beautiful. So. Thank you all for having me here. I'll just give it another moment here if there's a question that kind of popped up. Otherwise, we can start to close up. Anything else here?
Yeah, they're shy today. They're just chatting. So I see
Okay.
that Stefan says, I assume these phases can go over many years as well. Any suggestions on how to hold doubt and the don't give a shit mind when it blocks your practice for years?
Yeah, it can. Certain things can take a really long time to process. Like for example, for me, one of my disillusionments, and I see it coming and going, um, is this like just my cognitive mind, and some of you probably will relate to this. It's like it cannot grok what's happening now. Like to have practiced and to have seen and to experience, and like we're so interconnected, and then to like turn on it's just like what I'm gonna be in that disillusionment probably for the rest of my life in some ways. Like I don't know if that's ever gonna um so the way that I work with that right now, it's like, okay, as much as I don't want to, I do allow moments of like, I don't want to because it's uncomfortable, but I do allow moments of just being able to grieve and be in that process and normalize that for myself and for the people that are around me. Um, and then I also have given myself a lot of permission over the past. I mean, it's like one thing after another thing after another thing after another thing, right? The past 4 years, it's like that's really challenged like what practice needs to look like for myself, and I really have deepened into that. Oh yeah, everything can be my practice. Like dishes, honestly, are a big part of my practice. And I can see the cycles in the dishes. There's a completion point with the cycles in the dishes. I don't know how long it's going to stay complete because here comes another dish. My kid just put it in the seat. It's like, I really don't want to do this today, but who else? It's like I can see it mirroring everything in my life. It's like, okay, and the more that I deepen into that, it's like, okay, doubt, yes, it comes and goes. And the more I see this over and over and over again, like some moments I'm like, oh my God. But a lot of the times now I'm just like, oh, okay, there is something much bigger here. Um, and we are connected to it. And to me, that just it makes it more and more workable, even though sometimes I do feel stuck in it all. So. Hmm. Anything else for now?
There's some beautiful comments in the chat and a lot of appreciation and relief. I'm reading a little relief that people are finding themselves in one of these phases. Oh, Kate has raised her hand.
Hi, yeah, I guess, since there's time,
Mhm.
I love the topic. And the situation I'm in, I felt like maybe I'll just put it out there and see whatever you have to respond to it. I'm going on retreat this next weekend, at IMS, and really grateful. It'll be my second time there. And my first time was over 10 years ago, which was also my first retreat ever. It was like 9 days. I just dove in. And I've been in a number of retreats elsewhere since then. So, I mean, already I can, have comparing mind, compare and contrast mind of like how it'll be compared to my first time there, my first retreat ever, like the different space I'm in, meditation, spirituality, health, et cetera, et cetera. And, so already I'm like planning out my experience, my inner experience next week at this retreat. Um, so it's partially just like if I'm putting it out there because it feels very related to what you're speaking on. So partially wondering if you have any just like thoughts or suggestions around practicing with that, with all this in mind. And um, well, I guess it's kind of a different question topic, but the completion part is the most interesting to me because I'm like, I've had all these different ones, but I'm like, when can I like point to and be like, oh yeah, that's completion.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Um, well, one is that, when you're going on anybody that's going to go on a retreat or any kind of intensive, even if it's a day long, even sometimes if it's 20 minutes sitting on your cushion and you've decided you're going to do that, it's like any kind of container that we set for ourselves, there's going to be a whole process leading up to actually doing it. Yeah. So it sounds like that process is already started. It's already happening. And you didn't name the feelings that were coming up for you, but I'm guessing that you're pretty familiar with the pre-retreat jitters. That's what it sounds like is happening a little bit.
A little bit. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
all the time, but
yeah, yeah.
I just sort of like curiosity / anxiety.
Yeah, yeah. And excitement, it can like kind of get in there too. Yeah. So my main thing with leading up into retreat is like the preparation for the retreat is almost as important as the retreat itself. So, just give yourself a lot of space to be aware as possible of like, okay, this is what's going to happen as I start to put myself into a pressure cooker. All right. And I don't know exactly who I'm going to be on the other side. So part of this is normal. So just normalize it the best that you can. And then you've got your anchor, your go-to move. I would get very clear about what that is. If you're not clear about that, like where you just like, that's your home base practice, and then go for it. Cause if you just keep coming back to the home base and then you go on retreat, your mind's going to do all kinds of things, but just keep coming back here and explore, and you'll see the completion. I'm not going to give you much on that, because that's just going to be part of what happens through your practice, is recognizing what's already there and what you already have. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? We have a couple minutes.
I put your website in the chat. I
Thank
also
you.
put a link to the Donna in the chat
Thank you.
for folks. They can scroll up.
Thank
So,
you.
so lovely to have you here. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. And thank you all for your practice and for your dedication. And the mystery around completion will continue. However, this session will end now. So I appreciate it. And take good care, you all.